Hey, streaming audience. We're going to start streaming now. We're just getting ready to get going. Yeah, absolutely. Time to get started. Yeah. No, she finished her assessment on Friday, but they won't get results until, I don't know, late this week or something like that. But the biggest problem that they were worried she had was ruled out by the previous test, which was a sugar storage deficiency problem or something. And so now they're looking at cortisol and some things about that. And so that's what this latest test was about. Uh, and otherwise, she's doing just fine. Yeah, so she's just being a sweet little girl, and that's going well. Uh, I'm going to. Uh, for anybody who's catching us on streaming, I know last week we didn't stream because I couldn't figure out how to make it work, but I followed the instructions better this week, and it's working. And I'm going to start a recording now, and we appreciate you joining us today. Oh, you're welcome. It's always a joy to get to teach. And
Everybody out there that can't criticize because they can only praise you. Criticism doesn't work. Nobody could see it.
That's true. We don't have any online criticism
That's
from
right.
last week.
Yeah.
Wait
till this week.
Yes, wait till this week. We'll have some this week. Uh, so our Bolt family and extended family is all back from their vacation today, but they just got in uh, yesterday, and I'm teaching for us again. I'm Kendall Robertson, and let's get started then, shall we? We're running a few minutes behind. Um, so we're doing Second Kings today. Uh, Last week we talked about the story of Naaman and how he was a rich and important military person from Syria, and he came down and Elisha told him to go wash in the Jordan, and he would be clean of his leprosy. He didn't want to do that, but he did, and he was clean, made clean, and he was glorified God. So it was a good statement to everybody around of God's glory. And so that's what we had last week. This week is a little bit further on. So let's go to this first. And this kind of figures into the class. So we're asking, ask yourself, why do we like to hear stories about unlikely heroes? The underdog makes good story. And I love this picture because I watched an underdog cartoon when I was a kid. I don't know if this movie's any good, but the dog's cute. We have four unlikely heroes with single quotes around the heroes in today's story. They're lepers, and when they encounter some unexpected good fortune, uh, eventually they find the moral courage to bring that good news to some struggling people. And we can, even though this is a historical story about something that happened in Israel, we can kind of use it as a metaphor and illustration for things in our own life. And we're going to do a little bit of that as we go on. Anybody have any thoughts on why you might like a story about an underdog?
We can relate to it. See ourselves as underdogs.
It happened then, it can happen to me.
Right. Oh, and that figures into another little slide and a little bit later on in the story. So
I think everybody likes to, or most people like to see the person that's down rise above the circumstances and be on top instead of on bottom.
it's always nice to see that, and and that it could be me. Everybody thinks, even when you're on top, you sometimes it's easy to imagine yourself as an underdog or not as.
Or at least being able to, you're on top and the competition's coming after you.
Yeah, they're coming after you, and that could be me. If it could happen to them, it could happen to me. There's over $3 billion has been spent buying lottery tickets because it could be me
It could
on the
be,
latest
absolutely.
on the latest drawing. Over time as it's accumulated over several missed drawing.
Only one person actually won.
I can't comprehend
I can't.
winning $1 billion. It's beyond my,
That's too many zeros for me
yeah,
to figure out what to do with.
yeah.
There was one young man. I can't remember. I think he might have been in Florida or something, but he won a big lottery. I think it turned out to be over $200 million or something like that. And of all the lottery winners that I've seen on TV, he was the one who had been quiet for a little period of time and then came in and claimed it. And he said, this is a big responsibility. I'm going to try to use this money for good, and been consulting all my people, and he seemed to really take it more serious than I've heard anybody else publicly announce.
It's the one that I'm thinking of. Each year, he gives away money to people who need it. And I guess he's making enough on the interest that he set up a foundation that every year will just keep giving away.
Yeah, there've been several articles this week about the 10 worst things that can happen to you whenever you win the lottery. And these stories of people who won the lottery and threw all the money away. And welcome, Nick.
Yeah, look at the majority of the people in less than 2 years are in debt to the IRS.
Because they didn't manage their money right. They didn't think what to do with it or how to handle it, or blew it all on different things or something like that. But I was impressed that one young man a few years ago. I didn't go look up who he is, but he seemed to take it seriously and responsibly. I used to have this little mantra that I would. Mantra is not quite the right word. I would have this daydream that would flit through through my head of I wish I had $10 million. Kind of like the song, "Oh, I want to be a millionaire." I wish I had $10 million. And then over the last 5 years, it's been like, oh no, I don't want that level of responsibility. I don't want to. I don't want to. I just need enough. I don't want more than enough. That's a whole nother job to do, is to take care of that.
We were talking on vacation around dinner table, or nighttime table, we were,
Yeah.
nighttime table after dinner, about what if we won that amount, a big amount of money, then what would each family do with it? What would we do with it? And it was interesting. And then who would quit working and who would continue to work. It was interesting.
Can you imagine tithing that?
No, I can't. And from the standpoint of, should all of the tithe go to one church?
Well, look, that kind of money, you could go 40 or 50% tithe and divide it up. I mean, you're not going to run out.
Or also, can Can you dedicate 100% of your life to God's work and 100% of your resources and funds and, you know, that's another way to look at it.
Interesting questions.
But anyway, that's one of the little side stories of today is the underdogs, and it's fun to look at. Let's go to this is a slide from last week, but I thought it needed play again because these underdogs that we're talking about are lepers, and we talked about Hansen's disease, um, and what it causes. Hansen's disease had made it to the Middle East by about 100 or 200 years before the time of Christ, and so leprosy in the Old Testament is different, is not the same disease, but it has some similar effects, and basically it's this broad class of unclean conditions where you could even you could even a wall could have leprosy because it was infected with rot. So it's kind of a word that means a rotting or wasting disease. And so this is a good illustration of what Old Testament biblical leprosy might have looked like, and what some of the people that Jesus healed of leprosy in his time frame may have actually had this same disease. So I just thought I'd throw that back up there again. So let's talk about the backstory. So today's lesson is in 2 Kings 7. But you kind of need to know a little bit of the context from Kings 6. So I wanted to talk about that. Okay, so Ben-Hadad II, which I learned in my research is a ceremonial title rather than the actual name. But Ben-Hadad II was king of Aram, which is modern day Syria. The capital city of Damascus is basically king of Damascus and all of the surrounding area that he controlled. And he continued to war against Israel. So in our earlier lessons, he had done some raiding and taken some slaves, and they were kind of constantly fighting. And that's something that when I was growing up, I didn't quite realize that the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah was not nearly as coherent as we think of sovereign nations nowadays. That they were constantly being raided or having to pay tribute, or Syria might, if you go read the old documents, Syria might claim Israel as part of their country, but Israel's saying, no, we're not. And they're fighting over that back and forth. And you can just imagine the world where travel is so much slower than it is today. Communication is so much slower than it is today. I mean, we even talk about the new holiday our president added, Juneteenth, that had been celebrated for a long time, which was because, when the people in Texas first learned that the slaves had been emancipated, and how it was a long time after the war was actually over that they found out about it. That same sort of thing, even maybe more so. Another thing that we lose track of a little bit is, or that I lost track of a little bit, is that Israel and Judah is pretty small in comparison to modern day states that we think about. Particularly my background. I grew up in Texas, and it takes a day to drive across Texas, and then when we moved up to eastern United States, everything's so close together. You can just drive a little bit and you're in a different state. And so, but it was even closer than that for a lot of things there. So he continued his war on Israel, and there's some interesting details that go up to that, but he ended up sieging Samaria. So Samaria was the capital of Israel in that time, and Jerusalem was the capital of Judah. And he sieged Samaria, and under siege, the people in the city of Samaria, they were just starving to death. That's how you do a siege. You don't let anything in or out, and when the people inside get so hungry, they give up. And then you don't have to fight them; you just have to wait them out. And there was at least one case, which is one of the stories in chapter 6, of some people ate their children or ate their child in an attempt to survive. And for all this bad stuff that was happening, the king of Israel blamed Elisha. So he said, I'm tired of waiting for God to rescue us, so I'm going to send a messenger, go to Elisha's house, and cut his head off. This messenger came to Elisha's door, and he delivered the king's message. This disaster is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? And so that's the setting. That's where we are. And it starts with Elisha's answer to the messenger, who's still outside the door. So he didn't come in, but he's still outside the door. Here's a map of Israel. We've got one on the wall back there. So you see the part that's green is Israel. The part that's kind of purpley blue is Judah. And then Samaria, if you look right here, this is in the time of Elisha. And so Samaria is right here. And then the Jordan River is over here. You can see there's a branch of the Jordan River right here. So from here to here is about 25 miles. And you can see it's a very mountainy terrain. So if you were at Samaria and you wanted to go to Damascus, which is way up here, you'd want to go this way. So, the path from Damascus is down here and then across the mountains to Samaria. And Samaria is kind of set is surrounded by mountains so that you can go up in the mountains and look down on where all of Samaria is. And so that's the location. So Aram up here, which is modern day Syria, and Damascus, which is still a modern day city, they came down to make war on Israel. And if you look at that, I don't know, maybe it's 150 miles or maybe it's 200. I didn't measure it, but it's not a real long way. So the word of the Lord, 2 Kings 7, and this might be 1 through 2 instead of 1 through 1. Sorry about that. Josh, would you mind reading these first two?
Sure.
For us?
Elisha replied, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, "Look, even if the Lord should open the floodgates of the heavens, could this happen?" "You will see it with your own eyes," answered Elisha, "but you will not eat any of it."
So a couple of things about this. A seah of the finest flour is like about a gallon and a half or so. And, so 2 seahs is around 3 gallons, maybe a little more in each case. And I didn't calculate up the numbers of, how much a shekel was, but in the earlier part, it talked about how, in chapter 6, it talked about how food was ridiculously expensive and a donkey's head would sell for a whole bunch of money and everything. So really what Elijah's saying is food's going to be cheap by tomorrow. And then this officer on whose arm the king was leaning, it when we read that in English, it kind of implies that the king was right there and the king was leaning. But according to the research I did, it appears that that's a title, and that means he rode in the king's chariot with him and held on to the side of the chariot and made sure the king didn't fall down while they were going. It was like his official job, but that was his title. So probably the king was not there. The messenger was there, and the messenger was there. It was a strong soldier who would have had the wherewithal to, cut off Elisha's head. And then um, Elisha judges or passes God's judgment on this man for not believing, for not agreeing that what Elisha said is true. And so this messenger is going to be judged harshly for his doubt by the very next day. Uh, so the things that I wanted the class to think about is think about how we might find ourselves doubting God. Are there times in your life where you've doubted God? Um, I know there have been. For me, I had a big crisis in my life uh, back in the early 90s where I was looking at, is God real? Uh, you know, does he exist? I'd already become a Christian, but I was doubting God. And in that case, I felt like I was led by God to pray for faith. And I was in a case where I ended up spending time on the road, driving a significant distance a couple of times a week. And so I would pray during that time and pray for faith and pray for faith. And at one point, I just felt compelled to pull over to the side of the road, and I wrote out a poem to pray for faith. And then I prayed that poem as a prayer over and over and over and over for about 12 months. And felt at the end of that, I mean, there wasn't a dividing line or anything, but it kind of faded into my faith was renewed. You know, I was inspired by the case where Jesus is talking to a person and he says, Lord, I believe, please help my unbelief. And so that's what I was kind of trying to live that in my life, and it made a big difference. I mean, that was uh, 28 years ago or something like that, a good while ago, and it's made a big difference in my life ever since then. Though that wasn't the last lesson God had to teach me.
And even now, it won't be the
And
last.
it's still not the last lesson, but there were more lessons to come. But that was really a place where I was struggling with my faith, and I didn't know how to help it. And so all I could do was pray for it, and it was really really helpful and kind of a life changing event for me. Helped me in my marriage and my relationship with God and my relationship with life. Anybody else have anything you want to share about having doubted God anytime in your life? That's okay. So the thing I wanted to point out isn't Christ's sacrifice wonderful? So we can receive the grace of God's forgiveness, even though we doubt, even though you have doubts or problems or sin in your life. If you've accepted Christ, you can receive that grace, unlike this doubtful messenger. So this doubtful messenger is judged right now, physically, harshly in the next 24 hours. God's judgment has descended upon him, or will. But we don't have to have that same spiritual jeopardy in our life because Christ is there, making us look perfect to God because he chose to. For men with nothing to lose. So this is verses 3 through 4. And Fred, would you read the white part there for us? Come on over. That'll be good.
Okay. Now there were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. They said to each other, "Why stay here until we die? If we say we're going to the city, the famine is there, we will die. And if we stay here, we will die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we live. If they kill us, then we die."
Thank you. Very good. These guys had nothing to lose. Number one, they're lepers, so they're sitting outside the gate. Apparently they won't even let them in the city normally. They say that's an option, is to go into the city. They're starving to death. They're sick. Everybody's starving to death. Everybody's going to die. It's just everybody's at the end of their rope.
They really have a good attitude.
They kind of do.
If they accept us, we live and die. We're going to die anyway.
Yeah, these guys were desperate. Have you ever seen God work for good in your life when you saw, I said, now I missed a typo, when you saw no good ways out of a bad situation?
Oh, yes. Bringing me to salvation.
Uh-huh.
I was at the point prior to money was my God. And I was at the point where the only out that I saw, because I had millions of dollars of life insurance,
Mhm.
that I had it long enough that I was going to take my life. I could take care of the wife and the kids and all the bills. And the year that I gave my life to the Lord, I had the business had grown to $500,000, and I was $190,000 in debt.
Oh my. Debt can be very desperate.
Yeah. So,
Anybody else have a situation you want to share?
But this was one situation. This was like driving one time. I was probably like 22, 23 years old. I was driving my dad's Prius at the time and getting coming back from North Carolina, and it was torrential downpour. We got the area from Baltimore and Washington meet at 95, and there was 4 lanes in the highway. And I was going like 65 miles per hour. Everybody was going up, and I was like, "This is a lot of people going really fast in this one area." And I was behind a truck and like a sedan, and they were probably from me to that wall, and they didn't see one another. They were trying to go at the same lane at the same time, and they were right in front of me. And I said, "Oh God, Jesus, like save my life." So like I honked the horn all of a sudden, and they both like startled and like didn't run into each other, but they were about to like crash right into each other right in front. It was really scary. But I just remember that moment. I felt like I was saved. You know, it was really a life altering experience for me.
Yeah.
I was a young adult.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Talk about saved.
Yeah, it's like literally. Yeah.
Literally saved.
Oh, well, my illustration doesn't sound so good compared to that. I had one with debt, or it wasn't really debt so much as I had low financial resources, and I lived in Texas. It was the middle of summer, and my air conditioner went out. And you know, I'm a pretty stubborn and tough fella, and I didn't have resources to hire somebody to come fix it, so I worked to fix it. And I spent, I don't know, 10 hours taking it apart and putting it back together and trying to get it to work. And I finally, I was just, it was the middle of the night. My, last couple $100 was keeping the wife and kids in a hotel so you couldn't stay there. It was 110 degrees, and in the house it was 120, 130 degrees. And I couldn't fix it. And I just sat on the floor, after working all day trying to fix it. I just sat on the floor and cried all by myself. And my mama bought me a new air conditioner for lots of money. But there was just nothing to do. There was no way out. And I didn't ask mom to buy me a new air conditioner. She just called and talked to my wife and then offered to buy me a new air conditioner. Uh, that's one of the great other side lessons of my life is I never ever ever loan money to family. I always give money to family because it can be so damaging to family for them to have to pay it back, or them be angry at them because they didn't pay it back, or they missed their payment, all that kind of stuff. So,
Then if you win the lottery, then they're gonna come back and loan.
well, you don't have to give them the money, but don't
Or if
loan
they
it and
win the
give it.
lottery, you loaned them money 20 years ago.
Yeah.
With interest on
The
it.
interest on that.
Tolls
Uh,
are the same way.
that was something my
Oh, yeah.
that, that's a different story. My grandmother kept records of who owed her money. And toward the end of her life, she had a meeting where she explained to everybody what they owed and how it was coming out of their inheritance. Uh, I loved my grandmother. She's quite the character. So the real question here is: God ever used a desperate time in your life to bring you closer to Him? And the one I was telling earlier about my life, where I was praying for faith, I had some job problems, some marital problems, some financial problems, and that was probably why I was looking for faith instead of just being faithful in my own self. So I don't think I was that desperate at that time. I was desperate for lack of faith. But God improved my life through that. Um, Anybody else have anything else they want to share? Okay. Let's go to the next slide, except it won't go. There we go. All right. I titled this one, God's Victory Needs Not Men's Help. So, Kathia, would you like to read all this white text for us?
At dusk they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there, for the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army, so that they said to one another, "Look, The king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us. So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. The men who had leprosy reached the edge of camp, entered one of the tents, and ate and drank. Then they took silver and gold and clothes and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent and took some things from it and hid them also.
So this is what happens to our little side story of our unlikely heroes, our underdogs, thrown, stuck at the opening of the gate, begging for food. Nobody has enough food for themselves, much less for them. Okay, we're just gonna die, so we might as well go give ourselves to the enemy. And they and they show up, and there's nobody there, and all their stuff is there still. Can you imagine being these guys? Uh, it sounds like something out of a comedy show. They just kind of stagger up, and there's everything they ever wanted. So they hit the jackpot, and I put a little jackpot alert graphic down there. Uh, and so we were talking about this a little bit before class, but think of what you would do if you suddenly came into great good fortune. And I like it. They enter one of the tents. They're like, food, let's eat and drink. And they're like, okay, let's get some stuff and let's go hide it. That's like our modern lottery advice. You win the lottery, you stay quiet. You put it in a safety deposit box. You get financial advisors. You make sure you have a blind trust corporation so nobody can tell who you are. You go hide your good stuff. You hide all your good stuff.
There's only a few states that allow you to do it without giving up your name at all.
Yeah.
Maryland, one of them, you can be anonymous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most of them because if nobody was ever pronounced winner of the lottery, how long would it be before people, like 5 seconds before people begin to believe nobody got the lottery ever?
Just give more money to the government.
Yeah, it's just or for their cronies or for the slush fund or something like that. And so there's only like George says, there's only a couple states that let you actually stay anonymous. But then what do? You announce that you won, and then you change your name.
Don't get on TV.
Sometimes winning a big lottery like that is very isolating because people quit their job and so many of their family are turned into gimmies, and most of us have seen some articles on that.
Family members just come out of the woodwork.
Hey, I have
That's
this.
one of the jokes in the genealogy groups that I'm a part of, is that if you're ever having trouble with your family tree, just win the lottery. And everybody will come out of the woodwork.
Yeah, you'll see who's there, and you'll see who you have a bad relationship with too.
I watch that show occasionally, My Lottery Dream Home.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it interesting to watch how people decide how much of their lottery winnings they're going to spend on their house. And so there was one young couple with several kids, and they were living in a very small house, especially for the number of children they had. And let's say they won, I don't know, $1 million. And they said they would go up to spending $700,000 out of that million. And I was sitting there, no, you don't want to do that. That's a dumb thing to do because you got to pay taxes on this house and upkeep on this house and all these other things in your life are going to change. And what about putting some aside for your kids' college? And
they're not even going to get $700,000.
they won't even get it.
Yeah, once they get the taxes, they'll be lucky to get $500,000.
And I was just thinking the foolishness of people who can't handle.
They will win again.
They're going again, yeah.
One guy won it twice. It seemed to always win in Florida for some reason. This one guy in Florida won twice. And I saw a show a long time ago. It's how the lottery ruined my life. And they go through these three people, and the one guy won it twice somehow, and spent all his money on boats and like houses, and couldn't pay taxes on the boats, and like the boat slips, to rent the space, and just became bankrupt again. It was just like.
Well, Jesus said, if you've been faithful in little things, you will be faithful in big things because you've learned how to manage the little things in life.
So it's good fortune. You've always got to deal with it. I've run into this in business. If you've got a small business, and then you win a big contract. So now your business is doubled in size, but that contract's going to run out eventually, and you've got to have a business development pipeline to match. That's twice what it was before. Businesses often, when they win that next big contract, their business development pipeline stays the same. And so when the contracts run out, it's like, oh, how do we find all these people jobs? How do we, and it's really hard, all the things you have to do to do it. These guys didn't worry about this. This is the Old Testament times, and these guys were living hand to mouth. They did worry enough to go off and hide and save some of the stuff they saw. Things to point out: not a single soldier had fought at all. The enemy was just gone. So God won this battle. God fought this battle. God thought of this battle. The people in the city were just planning to sit there and eventually give up probably within a few days because it was just gotten too bad. God did what he wanted in his way for his glory. If you paid attention to some of the other classes that we've had, the king of Israel wasn't even a good guy. The Israelites had fallen away from God. We're not, there were some thousands that still followed God and listened to his prophet and, all that kind of stuff. So they weren't completely reprobate as a country, but, these were it was a misbehaving country, but God wanted to do this to show them, to show us in the story today, to show the Syrians what the situation was. All right, so let's go to this next one, telling the good news. Wendy, can you read the white here for us?
Then they said to each other, what we're doing is not right. This is the day of good news, and we have been keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace. So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them. We went into the Armenian camp, and no one was there, not a sound of anyone. Only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents left just as they were. The gatekeeper shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace.
These guys, they left at dusk, probably in hopes of not being seen at a distance. And I would guess, in hopes of not being seen at a distance and filled full of arrows by the Arameans. And so they left at dusk so they could kind of, under some cover of darkness, go up to the Arameans' tent. And then they had just been sitting there in the evening enjoying themselves and hiding off their stuff. So that was in the slide before. But they eventually came to their senses, and they're like, okay, our bellies are full. We've hidden off some of the gold for ourselves. We can't just sit here all night enjoying all this stuff. Let's go tell everybody. So they got to go and tell the good news to the front, of the city. So have you ever reported good news that was picked up and repeated by others? What's some good news that you've ever reported that others went and ballyhooed?
Birth of my children.
Absolutely. That was the example I was thinking of. My niece just had a baby, and when it was reported she had a baby, we were like calling everybody, she had a baby and it was all fine. That was good news. Anybody else? Another similar one?
Well, it wasn't good news. We had quite the adventure yesterday on the way home, trying to find somewhere to eat lunch. And so we had gotten off of 95 in Roanoke Rapids, and we were like, okay, there's a Chick-fil-A, we'll go to Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A was 2 miles from the exit, so we wandered through Roanoke Rapids to find it. It was closed for remodeling. So we'll go back to the Zaxby's that was next to the entrance to 95 and eat there. The line to get into the Zaxby's was out of the parking lot. Okay, we'll go to Emporia. We go to Emporia, Burger King.
No, it was Wendy's first.
Wendy's first. Went to Wendy's first. got into Wendy's
Waited
And-
20 minutes in line,
because they were slammed. The register stopped working.
like two customers in front of us after we made it all that way. Boom. And then
And
the girl just goes,
teenager goes, registers aren't working.
and just turns
And
around and walks
walk
away.
And
And I said, well, we were just saved from food poisoning. Let's just get-
Now,
Did you say that out loud?
No,
No.
I said it after the fact.
the register at the drive-through was still working, and in my head, I'm like, well, you should just like alternate between the drive-through and people in the store. Use your working register, but what do I know? I've never worked fast food. But the problem was she hadn't said it loud enough for any but the first like 2 or 3 people to hear. So everyone's looking around because they see people walk away, and I turned around and I said, the registers aren't working. You can go through the drive-through. And I was sharing the good news, as it were.
And now you're 20th in line.
So we left, went to the Burger King. We thankfully got our food, but then they got so backed up with people from the Wendy's that they stopped taking orders. And so there were people standing in line to get food, just waiting, but they wouldn't take any orders. And so we shared the good news at Wendy's. It's not quite the same thing, but it was one of those like, why wouldn't you say it? To your point of your second question,
Mhm.
here's how I'll transition to that. If you have news that other people need to know, why would you whisper it?
Very good. Great.
There you
At the
go.
Burger King in Savannah Airport, they were out of burgers.
I get to finish this story. So, we really have breakfast, so I know this is not, well.
That's okay.
Hey, I connected it to the.
Yeah, she connected it, so.
So, yes, I get up to register, the lady said, we're out of burgers. We have fish or chicken, and I ordered, so then Eli wanted to, we had the 2 munchkins. Eli wanted something from Starbucks. So we were traipsing up to Starbucks, and this was truly just a coffee shop Starbucks. It didn't have all the other things. And so then we left there and walked back down to, no, the bagel place. You forgot. To the bagel place, and Eli wanted plain bagel. They were out of plain bagels. Then we walked next door to Aunt's, pretzels. They were out of pretzels of any kind. They had corn dogs.
Maybe they were under like siege like Israel was.
Apparently, thank God they were still able to get out by air.
Yeah.
Then we went over to Hudson Hughes, it's the equivalent of Hudson Hughes in the airport. You think there's gonna be some cold sandwiches or something like that? No, chips and candy with a sum total of what you, so, yeah, I mean, it was ridiculous that we didn't have any good news about food. And then, of course, on the airplane, because it was about an hour 45-minute flight, you only get the little bag of chance.
Well, this is why they say get to the airport 2 hours early, so you can visit all the kiosks.
Which we did.
But they were all empty.
We got back to Ball, and so there was someone, this is sharing good news, there was talking to this lady who, were waiting in the airport, and they were going kind of 3-hour layover in Baltimore, because then they were flying to Las Vegas. And we were all talking no food, and I said, not to worry, let me tell you good news, that when you get to BWI, there's gonna be more choices of food than you can ever imagine. And she seemed quite encouraged with that good news.
Well, there you go. Well, to go back and reiterate my last point in yellow there. So think about how this story and the other stories we've shared here can illustrate our receiving the good news of God's grace through Christ. And should we be compelled to share that good news? Because now this story is a historical story. It's not necessarily directly connected to Christ, so as good an illustration as any other. But any time you have good news, should you want to keep it to yourself? You don't. You want to spread it. You want to tell everybody the good news. And so,
Unless you win $1 billion.
well, unless you want to know your, well, that's good news for you, not for me. I don't know. That's, oh man, I would not want that responsibility. But anyway, these guys were compelled to share their good news, but not at first. At first they were just enjoying it, and then they're like, "Wait a minute, people really need to know this, so let's go tell them." So think about that and how you are with Christ. Uh, Carl, could you read the white text for us here?
King got up in the night and said to his officers, I will tell you what the Americans have done to us. They know we are striving, and they have left the camp to hide in the countryside, thinking they will surely come out, and then we will take them alive and get into the city. One of his officers answered, have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Their plight will be like that of the Israelites left here. Yes, they will only be like these Israelites who are doomed. So let us send them to find what happened.
Well, so one thing, the good news showed up, and the lepers didn't bring the good news to the king. The lepers brought the good news to the gate, and then it made its way to the king. And of course, everybody else had been hearing it as it went along. Maybe not the whole populace. And the king was suspicious. And he's this is the trick. They're just hiding. They're gonna, as soon as we go out there and go, yay, food, they're gonna all jump on us, and we're gonna all be destroyed. And I'm doing the math on this. What this officer says: have some men take 5 horses that are left in the city, and we're gonna send out chariots. And we'll find out in the next slide. They sent out 2 chariots. So how do 5 horses fit in 2 chariots? You'd put 2 in front. So does one of them have 3 horses in front of the chariot and the other one has 2? Or does it bring an extra one because all the horses are so almost far gone that one one's going to drop dead? I don't, I don't know. But, but yeah, but and this kind of echoes what the lepers went through. Like, they're going to die if they stay in the city. The men or we send out are going to die if they stay in the city. If they go out and the Arameans are waiting to get them, they're going to die when they see the Arameans. So let's just send them out. So going back to my theme that I'm trying to pull this together on. So thinking of this story as an illustration for the good news of Christ, consider how someone who's just hearing that gospel might check to see if it's true. You tell your friends, your acquaintances, your whatever about Christ, and they might be skeptical, just like the king. And think how they might scrape up all their courage and energy to look for evidence of this joyous power, love, and forgiveness of God. And then think about, are you that evidence for them?
What you can do is just give your testimony. You can't doubt that. You can't say that didn't happen. You can't say that's made up.
Well, that'll tell people. And so that'll get them, here's the good news. That's a great way to get the good news. But then they go, well, maybe this is the thing for me. Let me get involved in a church. And then if they find gossip and backbiting and angry people and, in the church.
I was literally thinking those exact words. We're cooking in here.
They might feel at home, but it might not confirm the good news for them. So that's the thing for us to internalize, that our testimony and having the courage to tell others about our relationship with Christ is very important. But our testimony is not just what we say or just what we have in a moment. It's also our whole life.
It's what we do.
And it's what we as a church do. And all those things are part of our testimony to people. One of the things that of late God has led me in our family prayers is God help us to behave in a way that represents you well to the people around us, that makes the people around us want to know you because we know you and they know us. And that's a tall order. That's hard to do. But think of that as telling your good news in your life, in the fabric of your life. And it's something that we as Christians don't always do as good a job of as we'd like to. We're getting close on time, but I think we're all right. So this is searching for the truth. And so, George, could you read these white stuff for us?
So they selected 2 chariots with their horses, and the king sent them after the Armenians' army. He commanded the drivers, "Go and find out what has happened." They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found that the whole road strewed with clothing and equipment the Armenians had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king.
So these guys, they didn't just go, hey, yeah, imagine this. It's a whole big army that has spent obviously a lot of time investing Samaria and doing this siege. And then it's getting dusk, and they hear chariots and horses echoing through this area where that's surrounded by mountains where Samaria is. Uh, if you go a little bit earlier in Second Kings, there's the case where Elisha and his servants were being attacked, and the servant was worried, and Elisha says, "Don't worry, God's army is here to help us." And he opened the eyes of the servant, and the servant saw angels and chariots and horses and soldiers all around, spiritual soldiers all around. And then the servant felt better. In that story, Elisha asked God to strike the army, uh, and it was the Arameans, blind. And by blind, obviously, as the story goes on, obviously it meant like, you know, probably not blind, but more like unable to recognize what they were seeing. Because then Elisha says, "Oh, well, let me lead you to where you need to go." And he followed him, and he took them into Samaria. And so this was before the siege of Samaria. So he took them into Samaria. And then after they were in Samaria, he asked God to open their eyes and they could see, and they were all caught. The whole army was caught in Samaria. And the king was like, "What do I do? Do I kill them?" And Elisha says, "No, if you captured them as prisoners of war, you wouldn't kill them. So give them a good banquet and send them on their way." And he gave them a lot of food, had a big party, and they all ate, and then he let them go. These are probably the same soldiers that came in and or some of the same soldiers that sieged them later. So how many years are between those? We don't really know what the time frame was. But for a time, nobody was fighting Israel because their God was so powerful, and they led the whole army in the middle of Samaria and then opened their eyes and they realized where they were. That's an extra little Sunday school lesson for free. But they sent these guys out. They looked around. The land there, they probably, they went about 25 miles to the Jordan. And these Arameans, they didn't just walk away. They didn't pack up someone. They ran. So they were afraid of the sound, and they, felt they couldn't wait till tomorrow, and they thought they were caught and done for. And so they ran, and then they're running with some of the stuff they could carry, and they're throwing that off because it's not going fast enough, because they're trying to get away from the Egyptians and the Turkish, who those two armies they thought were coming in to save were from. They just left everything. So these guys went and looked and found it was true. And so back to that same theme, God's love, share it, tell it, show it. When someone seeking Christ looks for evidence of his love to help them accept the truth, will they see you and find the light of Christ's love there shining for them to see? But try, try to let the joy of Christ shine through in not just a church or in a prayerful moment, but through your whole life. So now the rest of the story. So this is just kind of, you can keep reading. So 2 Kings 7, 16 through 27. And then there's another little story. And then in chapter 8, starting at verse 7, there's a little more about this. So on hearing the good news, all the people in the, this is not text from the Bible. This is summary text that I wrote. So on hearing the good news, the people went out from the city. And they plundered that abandoned enemy camp, and food was very plentiful. And just like Elisha said, food sold for really cheap. Now, the judged messenger who didn't have Christ's forgiveness, that had God's spiritual judgment on him for not believing the prophet of God, he was there for the good news, but he was trampled to death by all the people trying to get out of the gate to go and find all the stuff. So he was, immediately punished for that. And then sometime later, Ben-Hadad II, the king of Syria, was assassinated by his second in command, Hazael. Now, there's an interesting part where Elisha is involved in that assassination attempt because King Ben-Hadad II is ill, and he sends Hazael to go talk to Elisha and ask, "Am I gonna survive or not?" And he brings a bunch of gifts and stuff. Is the king gonna get well? And Elisha says, "Well, yeah, the king's gonna get well." And then he starts crying, and Hazael says, "Why are you crying?" He goes, "Because you're going to be king after him, and I'm just crying for all the bad things you're going to do to Israel." And Hazael goes back, and the king is getting better, and he kills him. He smothers him, so he gets to be the king. And then he named his son Hadad the third. That's, and I don't know if that's in the Bible, but that was historically, he named his son Hadad the third. Which is sort of a title and sort of a name, and I didn't quite understand all that, but generally the kings had a different name, and Ben-Hadad wasn't always the name of the king, but it was one of the titles of the king. So that's where this story ends up. Anybody have anything else you'd like to share about the story or questions? Or all right, I'm going to stop the stream. Hey, thank you, streamers, for coming to join us today, and I hope you enjoyed what we went through.